In May 2026, the LHCb collaboration at CERN recorded a subatomic event that the fundamental laws of physics dictate should not happen. They measured the decay of a heavy, unstable particle called the B-meson, and the resulting debris did not balance the mathematical equations that hold our physical reality together. The probability of this being a random machine error is roughly 1 in 16,000. You trust the mechanical consistency of your world. When you drive a car across a massive steel suspension bridge, you do not worry that the molecular bonds inside the cables will spontaneously decide to behave like liquid. You trust that the forces of nature are permanent, unchanging pillars. For 50 years, the standard model of particle physics has been the absolute blueprint of those pillars. It is a rigid, unforgiving ledger that accounts for every fraction of energy in the cosmos. It is the only reason the atoms in your blood do not repel each other and scatter into the wind. But the ledger is bleeding. When a B-meson decays, the standard model requires it to produce electrons and muons at precisely the same rate. This symmetry is not a suggestion. It is the structural tension that keeps the universe upright. The data from CERN shows that this symmetry is failing. The muons are missing, 1 in 16,000. In the realm of particle physics, this is known as a 4 sigma deviation. It is not an absolute 5 sigma confirmation of a broken universe. It is something much more agonizing. It is a knock on the door in the middle of the night. It is loud enough to keep thousands of physicists awake, but just ambiguous enough to prevent them from officially declaring that the foundation of reality has collapsed. They are waiting. And that waiting is the most terrifying part. Imagine that steel suspension bridge again. The cables look perfectly normal to the naked eye, the traffic flows without interruption. But deep inside the core of the main support wires, a silent, thermodynamic chemical transition is occurring. The carbon and iron atoms are slowly exchanging their properties, turning the high-tensile steel into brittle, compressed ash. The bridge is still holding your weight today, but the structural integrity is already gone. The universe is not a stable architecture. It is a machine running on a strict energy budget, governed by the blind, indifferent laws of thermodynamics. If the subatomic forces are beginning to drift, if the particles are disobeying the script, it implies that the machine is struggling to maintain its own operating parameters. The universe does not hate you. It simply might not have the mathematical capacity to sustain the current version of physics indefinitely. The rules are not permanent. They are an exhausting, temporary state of equilibrium. And the data from CERN suggests that this equilibrium is quietly running out of fuel. If the mathematical bedrock of empty space is actively losing its grip, why does the room you are sitting in still look so perfectly continuous? Why do you still feel whole? Is the universe somehow holding itself together just for you? Or is there something fundamentally compromised about the way your eyes are processing the data? In the next 90 minutes, we are going to follow this thermodynamic failure down a terrifying spiral. We will start by examining the invisible cracks expanding in the macroscopic space around you right now. Then, we will move inward, exposing the brutal, exhausting lengths your own biological body goes to in order to blind you to those very cracks. And finally, at the absolute bottom of the spiral, we will arrive at a devastating conclusion about the decaying cluster of information you call your memories. You think you are an observer, standing safely on solid ground. But CERN just proved the bridge is turning to ash, and nobody has a backup plan. If the anomaly at CERN was an isolated incident, you could dismiss it. You could convince yourself that a single machine, no matter how complex or expensive, simply suffered a calibration error. You could go to sleep tonight believing that the mathematical architecture of the universe is still intact, and that the decay of a subatomic particle in Europe has nothing to do with the room you are sitting in. But the bleeding did not stop in Europe. To understand how deeply the infection has spread, you have to look at a completely different experiment. Not a collision of particles, but a measurement of nothingness. Look at the empty space between your face and the screen you are watching right now. You assume that this space is passive. You treat a vacuum as a sterile, empty stage, where the events of reality simply happen. When there is no matter present, you believe there is zero activity. The mathematics of quantum field theory state otherwise. Empty space is not empty. At the subatomic level, the vacuum is a boiling, chaotic ocean of virtual particles continuously popping into existence, briefly interacting with the physical world and annihilating each other in fractions of a millisecond. You cannot see them. You cannot feel them. But they dictate the friction of the universe. They are the background noise of reality. In Batavia, Illinois, at the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, physicists decided to measure the density of that invisible ocean. They did not build a microscope. They built a 50-foot superconducting magnetic ring. The engineering required to construct this machine borders on the impossible. The magnetic field it generates is so sensitive, so perfectly uniform, that when the ring had to be moved from a facility in New York to Illinois, they could not put it on a truck. The microscopic vibrations of the highway asphalt would have irreparably fractured the alignment of the electromagnets. Instead, they placed the 50-foot ring on a specialized barge, floated it down the eastern seaboard, around Florida, and up the Mississippi River, moving at a crawl just to protect the integrity of the metal. They went to these exhausting lengths to eliminate any possibility of human error. They needed an absolutely perfect environment, not to smash matter, but to watch a single, isolated particle spin. The particle is called a muon. Think of it as the heavier, highly unstable cousin of the electron. When you shoot a muon into an intense magnetic field, it acts like a microscopic compass needle. It spins, and as it travels through the vacuum, it wobbles. This wobble is not random. The standard model of physics dictates that as the muon spins, it interacts with the boiling ocean of virtual particles in the vacuum. Every single known particle in the universe, every quark, every boson, every photon briefly tugs on the muon as it passes by, altering its trajectory. Because the standard model claims to know the identity of every single particle that exists, the equations can predict the exact frequency of that wobble. They can calculate it down to the 12th decimal place. Predicting a number with that level of precision is the mathematical equivalent of calculating the exact distance from London to Tokyo and being accurate to within the width of a single human hair. It is an arrogant, absolute prediction. For the framework of our reality to survive, the muon must obey that exact constraint. In August 2023, after analyzing billions of muon trajectories, Fermilab released their final data. The muons were wobbling too fast, not slightly, not within a safe margin of thermal noise. The magnetic moment of the particle was violently disobeying the foundational equations of empty space. The number that came back from the supercomputers did not match the textbook. This is not a theoretical debate. This is a measurement. The deviation sits at 5 sigma. In the unforgiving hierarchy of particle physics, 5 sigma is the absolute gold standard. It is the threshold for a definitive discovery. The probability of this being a random machine error or a statistical fluke is roughly 1 in 3.5 million. The machine did not fail, the math did not fail, the vacuum is compromised. Imagine standing in a sealed, soundproof room. You are holding a perfectly balanced, mechanical metronome. You know the exact weight of the pendulum, the tension of the internal spring, and the density of the air in the room. You can mathematically predict its exact rhythm. You set it in motion, it ticks back and forth, but suddenly, instead of ticking evenly, the pendulum violently jerks forward, thrown off its axis by an invisible force. There is no wind. There is no seismic activity. You are entirely alone in the room. The only logical conclusion is that the empty air inside the room is not empty. It is packed with an invisible, unrecognized physical geometry that is actively colliding with the pendulum. That is what Fermilab proved. The muon is interacting with something that is not in the ledger. There is a rogue, heavy particle or a completely unknown fifth fundamental force of nature hiding in the blind spots of the quantum vacuum. Think about what that actually implies for your immediate surroundings. The empty space in the room you are sitting in right now is actively hiding a physical presence that human mathematics cannot account for. You rely on the electromagnetic force to keep the atoms of your environment stable. You rely on the strong nuclear force to prevent the matter around you from dissolving. But if there is a fifth, undiscovered force operating in the background, it means the entire thermodynamic budget of the universe is being quietly drained by an unseen parasite. The forces holding your reality together are sharing space with an entity that does not obey our laws of physics. The ledger is fundamentally broken. CERN proved that particles are decaying incorrectly. Fermilab proved that the vacuum itself is populated by ghosts. The macroscopic laws of physics, the very rules that dictate the stability of stars and the orbit of planets, are resting on a quantum foundation that is actively failing to balance its own equations. The universe is functioning on a corrupted operating system. But if you think an invisible force occupying your room is the ultimate violation of your reality, you are underestimating the cruelty of the universe. An invisible parasite in the vacuum is terrifying, but it still obeys the concept of location. It is still somewhere. To understand the true scale of the collapse, we have to look at an experiment that destroyed the very concept of distance itself. Look at the walls of the room you are currently occupying. Look at the physical distance separating your chair from the closed door. You derive a profound, subconscious sense of absolute safety from the concept of distance. You believe that the physical space between you and the rest of the universe acts as a definitive, mathematical barrier. If a catastrophic gamma-ray burst erupts from a dying star, you do not panic because the star is 4,000 light-years away. If a toxic chemical detonates on another continent, the blast radius cannot touch the geographic coordinates of your home. You operate under the strict assumption that for a physical event to affect you, it must cross the space between point A and point B. It must travel through the vacuum. It must obey the absolute speed limit of the universe. In physics, this comforting, intuitive belief has a formal name. It is called local realism. Locality dictates that an object can only be influenced by its immediate, touching surroundings. Realism guarantees that objects possess definite, independent properties even when they are entirely isolated. Local realism is the bedrock of classical mechanics. It is the structural integrity of your 3D environment. In 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to 3 men who definitively proved that local realism is a mathematical hallucination. To understand the sheer magnitude of the damage Alain Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger inflicted on the fabric of reality, you must understand the titan they were fighting. They were fighting Albert Einstein. Almost a century ago, the mathematics of quantum mechanics began to spit out an impossible scenario. The equations indicated that if you took 2 subatomic particles, 2 photons of light, and entangled them, they would share a single mathematical state. If you measured the orientation of one photon, you would instantaneously determine the orientation of the other, no matter how physically far apart they were placed. Einstein was horrified by this. He famously ridiculed it as spooky action at a distance. His objection was not philosophical, it was strictly thermodynamic. If 2 particles could synchronize their states instantaneously across vast distances, it meant that information was traveling faster than the speed of light. It meant the universe was actively bypassing the physical space between objects. Einstein spent the latter half of his life trying to mathematically prove that entanglement was just a statistical illusion. He argued that there were hidden variables inside the particles, microscopic, pre-programmed physical instructions, acting like synchronized analog watches, deciding their states the moment they were created, long before they were separated. He died believing the universe was sensible. He was wrong. Decades later, Zeilinger and his colleagues built the machines to test the fabric of distance. They did not rely on chalkboards. They relied on high-powered lasers, kilometers of fiber optic cables, and hypersensitive photon splitters operating in absolute zero temperatures. They generated pairs of entangled photons and fired them in opposite directions. They separated them by hundreds of meters, then by kilometers across the Canary Islands, and eventually they beamed them to satellites in low Earth orbit. They designed automated, hyper-fast switching mechanisms to randomly measure the state of particle A, completely physically isolating it from particle B. They ensured that not even light itself would have the thermodynamic time to cross the distance between the two laboratories to communicate the result. They isolated the particles completely. They severed every conceivable physical and energetic connection. Then they measured. When particle A collapsed into a specific state, particle B instantaneously collapsed into the exact corresponding state, every single time. There was zero latency. There was no signal delay. The statistical correlation violently broke a mathematical boundary known as Bell's inequality. But the scientific community is deeply paranoid. They refuse to accept that distance was an illusion. They argued that maybe the machines generating the random measurements on Earth were somehow secretly communicating through a microscopic loophole in the physical environment. They demanded absolute cosmic isolation. So, in 2018, an international team of physicists went to a terrifying extreme. They conducted the cosmic Bell test to ensure that no hidden variables could possibly be coordinating the particles on Earth. They stopped using earthly computers to trigger the measurements. Instead, they aimed massive observatories at two different quasars at opposite ends of the observable universe. Quasars are supermassive black holes emitting blinding, chaotic radiation. One quasar was roughly 8 billion light-years away, the other was 12 billion light-years away. The physicists used the fluctuating color of the ancient light from these dead galaxies to dictate the exact angle of the polarizers measuring the entangled particles in their laboratory. Recognize the sheer, crushing scale of this isolation. For Einstein's hidden variables theory to be true, the universe would have had to pre-program the particles in the laboratory by coordinating with the light of a quasar that left its source 12 billion years before the Earth was even formed. The universe did not pre-program anything. The measurement held. The entanglement was instantaneous. The correlation remained flawless. This is not a theory. It is a Nobel-winning measurement backed by the oldest light in the cosmos. The particles were not communicating. They were not sending invisible radio waves through the vacuum. Communication requires time. This required zero time. The mathematics of classical distance broke. Hold a physical key in your hand. Turn it in the empty air of your room. On the exact opposite side of the planet, buried in the bedrock of a different continent, a heavy titanium vault door loudly clicks, unlocked at the exact, unmeasurable fraction of a millisecond. No radio frequency was broadcast. No seismic force traveled through the Earth's crust. The lock and the key are entangled. The physical rock, the oceans, and the molten mantle of the Earth separating them are mathematically bypassed. The 8,000 miles of physical matter between them simply did not participate in the event. Zeilinger's experiments, backed by the cosmic void, proved there is no hidden wire. The connection does not exist in the physical space between the objects, because physical space is not a barrier. This brings the cosmic horror of the quasars crashing directly into the room you are currently sitting in. If distance is a mathematical illusion, then the walls surrounding you are not actually protecting you from the outside world. The space separating the carbon atoms in your chair from the radioactive decay of a distant star is a macroscopic lie. At the quantum level, the boundaries of your immediate 3D environment are actively bleeding into the rest of the cosmos. You are completely, inescapably embedded in a physical structure that does not care about the barriers you have built to feel isolated, which forces a terrifying thermodynamic question. If the universe is a single, deeply entangled mathematical web of infinite density where distance does not exist and every particle is instantly connected to every other particle, why does your room look so normal? Why do you experience a three-dimensional grid? Why does it take time to walk to the door? The answer lies in the harsh rules of data management. If the macroscopic universe had to physically render and maintain the infinite, instantaneous quantum connections of every single atom at all times, the thermodynamic budget of reality would instantly overload. The universe would collapse under its own mathematical density. So, the universe cheats. It uses data compression. The three-dimensional space you are experiencing right now, the distance to your door, the height of your ceiling, is not a fundamental physical truth. It is an interface. It is a low-resolution, zipped file. The universe compresses the terrifying, infinite connectivity of quantum mechanics into a simplified 3D grid just to keep the macroscopic environment stable. You are not living in a physical room. You are living inside a compressed data format. The empty space around you is a thermodynamic downgrade, a cheap rendering trick designed to hide the fact that the atoms of your environment are pressed directly against the edge of the cosmos. Distance is just a firewall preventing a system crash. We have established that the vacuum is boiling with unseen, parasitic forces. We have now established that the physical space separating objects is a thermodynamic illusion, a compressed file format that allows reality to bypass distance entirely. The spatial dimensions of your environment are actively failing every rigorous measurement we throw at them. But spatial dimension is only one axis of the interface. If the universe is actively compressing the concept of distance to hide the true density of reality, what makes you think it is telling you the truth about the flow of time? Stand up. Take 3 steps across the room you are in. Stop. As you took those steps, you operated under a rigid, unshakable belief about the nature of time. You believe that now is a universal, objective constant. You believe that as you read this sentence, the rest of the universe is experiencing the exact same mathematical second. In your mind, time is a glowing front line, a leading edge of reality, moving uniformly forward. You treat the past as a graveyard of dead events that have burned out and no longer exist. You treat the future as an empty void, a blank, formless slate waiting to be written by the actions you take in the present. This feeling of a flowing, universal now is the most fundamental experience of your existence. It is also mathematically false. To break this illusion, we do not need fringe theories or unproven quantum anomalies. We only need the foundational pillar of modern astrophysics, Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity. Einstein definitively proved that time is not a master clock sitting in the center of the universe, ticking away the seconds for everyone simultaneously. Time is a localized, physical property. It is tethered directly to your speed and the gravitational field you occupy. When you stood up and walked across the room, you did not just change your physical location on a 3D grid. By gaining velocity, you mathematically tilted your personal plane of time relative to the rest of the cosmos. The British mathematical physicist Roger Penrose created a brutal geometric proof to demonstrate the terrifying reality of this tilt. It is known as the Andromeda paradox. Look at the ceiling above you. Roughly 2.5 million light-years in that direction sits the Andromeda galaxy. If you are sitting perfectly still in your chair, Your flat plane of the present slices through Andromeda at a specific geometric angle. Whatever physical events are happening there at this exact coordinate intersect with your shared now. But if you stand up and walk toward the door, your velocity alters the angle of that slice. Because Andromeda is so incomprehensibly far away, that microscopic tilt of your temporal plane on Earth is geometrically amplified into a massive chronological shift at the destination. By simply walking toward the door at 3 miles per hour, your slice of the present in Andromeda shifts forward by several days. If a hostile alien armada is stationed there, sitting still means your present contains an armada that is debating whether to attack. Walking toward the door means your present contains an armada that has already launched its fleet. If you turn your back and walk the other way, your present shifts backward. In that now, the armada has not even been built yet. The math is absolute. Your physical movement in this room dictates what now means in another galaxy. But this geometric reality forces a catastrophic paradox. If your now can contain an event that has not happened yet for someone sitting still in the exact same room, then that future event must already exist. It must be physically present in the architecture of reality, waiting for your temporal plane to intersect with it. You cannot intersect with something that does not exist. For the mathematics of special relativity to function, the future cannot be a blank slate. This mathematical absolute gives birth to a concept known in physics as the block universe. The cosmos is not a movie playing out frame by frame. It is a solid, four-dimensional block of space-time, a frozen crystal. Every event that has ever happened, and every event that will ever happen, exists simultaneously within this block. The Big Bang is permanently etched at one end. The heat death of the universe is carved into the other. Everything in between the birth of the Earth, the fall of Rome, the exact moment you took your first breath, and the exact millisecond your heart will stop beating is permanently, simultaneously embedded in the geometry of this crystal. Time does not flow. Time simply is. The physicist Hermann Minkowski, who formalized this mathematics, stated it bluntly: henceforth space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two will preserve an independent reality. You feel like time is passing because you are crawling along a fixed world line inside this block. You are illuminating one static slice of space-time at a time. Think of a physical vinyl record. The song does not pop into existence second by second as the needle touches the plastic. The entire song, the intro, the chorus, the final fade-out, is already physically pressed into the disc. You are simply experiencing the mechanical friction of the needle moving over the grooves. You are not writing your future. You are discovering a script that was finalized billions of years before you were born. The ink is dry. The universe is a finished product. Bring this mathematical certainty back into the room you are currently occupying. Look at the empty corner of your room. In the classical, comfortable view of time, that corner is just a pocket of empty space waiting for things to happen. But under the laws of the block universe, that corner is a hyperdense pillar of overlapping, static events. It physically contains the empty air of yesterday, the dust falling today, and the physical events of tomorrow. They are all stacked on top of each other in the fourth dimension, entirely rigid, completely unchangeable. This means your future is not a fluid probability. It is a physical object. If you are destined to die in this room 50 years from now, that event is not waiting for you in an unwritten, abstract timeline. Your corpse is already physically located in the geometric coordinates of this room, sitting further down the temporal axis. It is a statue carved into the four-dimensional crystal of reality. You cannot avoid it. You cannot alter your trajectory to escape it. You are simply a mechanism on a fixed rail, riding the needle of existence until it inevitably hits that specific groove in the plastic. Every decision you think you are making to avoid danger is just a pre-recorded action pushing you toward a coordinate that has been waiting for you since the dawn of time. We have now systematically dismantled the macroscopic universe. We looked at the vacuum and found it boiling with unseen forces. We looked at distance and proved it was a compressed thermodynamic illusion. And now we have looked at time and found a frozen, inescapable prison where your future is already a fossil. The environment outside of your body is completely, fundamentally hostile to your intuition. The physics do not support your freedom, your safety, or your concept of reality. Which brings us to the most disturbing question of all. If the universe is a frozen, compressed, glitching structure, why does your body feel so alive? Why does your brain fight so hard to convince you that the world is fluid and free? The answer is not that you are special. The answer is that your biology is the ultimate accomplice in the cover-up. At this point, you might be rolling your eyes. You might be looking around your room, feeling the solid wood of your desk, listening to the mechanical ticking of the clock on the wall, and thinking, okay, this is entertaining theoretical physics. It is a great sci-fi story about a broken universe. But my life is real. The floor is solid. I am in control of my body, and I am living firmly in the present. Take a deep breath, take a sip of water, lean back in your chair. It is completely natural for your biological hardware to actively reject the crushing scale of these mathematical anomalies. Evolution designed you to ignore the quantum vacuum so you could focus on navigating the macroscopic world and securing calories. Your skepticism is just a survival mechanism. So let's leave the dying galaxies and the frozen blocks of space-time behind for a moment. Let's come back down to Earth. Let's look at something much smaller, much closer, and far more intimate. Let's look at the wet, 3-pound biological machine currently sitting in that chair. Because if you think the external universe is lying to you, you have severely underestimated the ruthlessness of the deception happening inside your own skull. Raise your hand. Snap your fingers directly in front of your face. Listen to the sharp crack. Watch the friction of your skin. Feel the impact of your thumb striking your index finger. You experience all three of these sensory inputs, the visual, the auditory, and the tactile, as a single, perfectly unified event. It happened instantaneously. You perceive yourself as a live observer, riding on the bleeding edge of time, reacting to physical reality exactly as it unfolds. That perception is a strict biological hallucination. You have never experienced the present moment in your entire life. To understand the mechanics of this deception, we have to look at the severe hardware limitations of the meat inside your skull. In the previous chapters, we established that the macroscopic physics of the universe are a frozen, deeply entangled, non-local block of mathematical data. The raw physics of reality are infinitely dense and utterly chaotic. If your biological senses were forced to process that raw, unfiltered physics in real time, your nervous system would instantly overload. The thermodynamic cost of rendering the actual universe would fry your neural pathways. So, millions of years of evolution built a firewall. It built a delay. Neuroscientists, heavily supported by the research of David Eagleman at the Baylor College of Medicine, have measured exactly how the human brain processes incoming sensory data. The mechanical wiring of your body is brutally inefficient. When you snapped your fingers, light hit your retinas and took a specific, measurable amount of time to travel as an electrical signal down the optic nerve to the visual cortex at the back of your head. The sound waves hit your eardrums and were converted into mechanical vibrations, then electrical signals, traveling at a completely different, much slower speed. The tactile feedback from your skin had to travel all the way down your arm, up your spinal cord, and into the somatosensory cortex. Every single piece of data arrives at the processing center of your brain at a completely different time. The visual data gets there first, the tactile data arrives later. The auditory data drags behind. If your consciousness experienced reality exactly as the raw physical signals arrived, the world would be a disjointed, nauseating mess. It would look like a corrupted video file, where the audio track is violently out of sync with the visual feed, and physical touch is delayed by a fraction of a second. You would not be able to catch a falling object. You would not be able to walk without stumbling. But you do not see a corrupted video file. You saw the snap of your fingers in perfect, impossible unison. How does the brain achieve this? By imposing a mandatory, universal blackout period. When the first signal, the visual flash of your fingers crossing, hits your brain, your consciousness is not allowed to see it. The brain intercepts the data and locks it in a dark room. It waits for the slower auditory signals to crawl up your neck. It waits for the tactile signals to make their way up your spine. Only when all the relevant data has finally arrived does the brain stitch it together, synchronize it, heavily edit out the inconsistencies, and then play it back for your conscious mind as a single, packaged historical event. The time it takes for your brain to perform this synchronization protocol is roughly 80 milliseconds. 80 milliseconds. That is the physical scar of your biology. That is the latency of your existence. To prove how ruthless this editing process is, perform a physical test. Tap your nose with your left index finger and tap your foot with your right hand at the exact same time. The neural signal from your nose only has to travel a few inches to reach your brain. The signal from your foot has to travel over a meter up the slow, electrochemical highway of your spinal cord. The physical data from your nose arrives at the processing center massively earlier than the data from your foot. But you do not feel two separate taps. You feel them simultaneously. The brain does not just hold the first signal in a dark room. It actively commits chronological forgery. When the slow signal from your foot finally arrives, the editing software in your brain retroactively changes the timestamp on the data. It rewrites your short-term memory to convince your consciousness that the two events occurred at the exact same millisecond. In neuroscience, this is known as post-diction. The brain alters the past before it allows you to experience it. Your consciousness is not a live feed. It is a forged document. This is not a philosophical metaphor about living in the past. This is a strict neurological measurement of your hardware. It means that your consciousness is operating on a mandatory tape delay. To prove that your brain is actively censoring the raw feed of reality, you can force a hardware glitch right now. Stand up and walk to a mirror. Look directly into the pupil of your left eye. Now, shift your focus to the pupil of your right eye. Shift back and forth. You will never see your own eyes move. The physical muscles in your face are rotating your eyeballs, but your visual field remains perfectly still. Why? Because the mechanical motion of your eyes swinging across the room is too blurry and chaotic for your brain to process. So, it simply shuts off the video feed. During the milliseconds your eyes are in motion, you are literally, physically blind. The brain edits out the motion blur and stitches the static images together, hiding its own lag. This is known as saccadic masking. You are hallucinating a seamless continuity that does not physically exist. Why would evolution force you to live inside a blind, predictive hallucination? To answer this, we must return to the macroscopic physics we established earlier. The real universe is a boiling quantum vacuum. It is a deeply entangled, non-local structure frozen in a four-dimensional block of space-time. Cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman proved mathematically through evolutionary game theory that if your biology evolved to perceive that actual raw truth of quantum physics, you would go extinct. The thermodynamic cost of rendering the block universe would instantly fry your nervous system. So, evolution built a user interface, the 3D space of the room you are in, the concept of a flowing present, the solid feeling of the chair. None of it is objectively real. It is a low-resolution biological desktop. The physical objects around you are just simplified icons designed to hide the lethal, infinite complexity of the source code. Your consciousness is not a viewer watching a screen. Your consciousness is the operating system, struggling to prevent a system crash. But the horror of the neurological delay does not stop at the simple fact that you are trapped in the past. It gets much worse. It becomes a matter of physical survival. Evolution faced a fatal contradiction. 80 milliseconds is a massive amount of time in the physical world. If a predator lunges out of the brush, or a piece of debris falls toward your head, and your consciousness is operating on an 80 millisecond tape delay, you will die. You will react to the falling rock when it is already crushing your skull. You cannot survive a hostile environment with that kind of latency. To keep the organism alive, the brain had to find a way to circumvent its own processing lag. It could not speed up the hardware. So, it had to cheat the software. If the brain cannot process the present fast enough, its only remaining option is to guess. This is a rigorously documented neurological mechanism known as the flash lag effect. To compensate for the 80 millisecond blackout, your visual cortex actively predicts the trajectory of moving objects and hallucinates their future positions. Throw a pen across the room, watch it move through the air. You are not seeing the actual pen. By the time the light from the moving pen reaches your retina and is processed by your visual cortex, the physical pen has already moved further across the room. If your brain showed you the real data, you would see the pen trailing behind its actual location. You would never be able to catch it. So, your brain calculates the speed and trajectory of the pen, generates a completely fabricated neurological rendering of where it assumes the pen will be 80 milliseconds from now, and projects that hallucination directly into your visual field. Read that again. The motion you are perceiving right now is a predictive hallucination designed to keep you from noticing that you are trapped in the past. The physical universe out there, the one with the broken quantum symmetries, the entangled void, and the frozen block of time, is too computationally heavy and too unstable for you to witness. So, your biology locked you inside the bone casing of your skull. It slides pre-rendered, mathematically predicted photographs under the door, telling you that this is what the outside world looks like. You have never directly touched the universe. The tactile sensation of the chair you are sitting on is just an electrical signal generated inside your own brain. The light of the room is just a simulation rendered in the absolute pitch-black darkness of your visual cortex. You think you are an independent observer with free will, making decisions in real time. But how can you possibly have free will when the reality you are reacting to is a heavily edited, predictive broadcast that has already been decided for you? We have established that the mathematical foundation of space and time is a frozen, compressed prison. We have now established that your physical body is actively lying to your senses, trapping your consciousness in an 80 millisecond tomb just to save processing power. But if your brain is this desperate to filter reality, what happens when the editing software itself begins to run out of memory? What happens when the sensor in the control room fails? Pull up the earliest, most vivid memory you have of your childhood. Reconstruct the geometry of the house you lived in, the color of the walls, or the specific sound of a family member's voice. You treat that memory as a sacred, permanent object. You operate under the assumption that your brain functions like a secure digital hard drive. When an event happens, you believe the brain records the raw data, encodes it into a file, and locks it away in a biological vault. When you want to remember that event, you simply walk into the vault, open the file, and watch the footage play back in its original, pristine condition. You rely on this assumption to construct your entire identity. You are the sum of your past experiences. But neuroscience dictates that this read-only vault does not exist. Your memory is not a video recording. It is a biological forgery. Every time you recall a past event, you are actively destroying the original data. To understand the cruelty of this mechanism, we have to use a microscope on the physical architecture of a memory. A memory is not a floating, abstract concept. It is a physical, tangible object inside your skull. When you learn something new or experience a significant event, specific groups of neurons fire together. As they fire, they physically alter their own structures, building new synaptic connections by synthesizing specific proteins. They create a physical web of meat and electricity. In neurobiology, this process of solidifying a memory into a physical structure is called consolidation. For decades, science believed that once a memory was consolidated, it was permanent. It was frozen. In the year 2000, a neurobiologist named Karim Nader at New York University conducted an experiment that completely shattered this belief. Nader wanted to test the structural integrity of the biological vault. He took laboratory rats and conditioned them to fear a specific, high-pitched auditory tone by pairing it with a mild electric shock. The rats consolidated the memory. The physical web of proteins was built in their amygdala. Days later, when Nader played the tone, the rats would instantly freeze in terror. The memory was intact. Then, Nader did something terrifying. He played the tone to trigger the rats into remembering the shock. But the exact moment they recalled the memory, he injected a specific chemical directly into their brains, a compound designed to simply block the brain from building new proteins. It does not erase existing structures. It only prevents the construction of new ones. The next day, Nader played the tone again. The rats did not freeze. They did not react. The fear was completely gone. The memory had been entirely, physically erased from their biological hardware. How is that possible if the memory was already a permanent physical structure? Nader proved that recalling a memory is not an act of reading a file. It is an act of physical destruction. When you access a memory, your brain must chemically destabilize the original protein web to bring the information into your conscious awareness. The memory physically melts. Once you are done thinking about it, the brain has to rebuild the entire protein structure from scratch in order to save it again. This process is called reconsolidation. You do not possess a secure vault. Your memory operates like a physical manuscript typed on paper. Every single time you want to read a page from your past, your brain forces you to burn the original piece of paper to ash. Then, before you forget what it said, your brain frantically scrambles to retype the entire page from scratch, relying entirely on your current emotional state and the context of the present moment to fill in the blanks. Every time you remember an event, you are not remembering the original event. You are only remembering the last time you retyped it. Think about the thermodynamic reality of this system. Why would evolution design such a violently destructive and unstable architecture for data storage? The answer is metabolic survival. The human brain is an extreme thermodynamic burden. It accounts for roughly 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of your total caloric intake just to keep the lights on. Maintaining a permanent, perfectly accurate, read-only neurological archive of every single event in your life would require an exponentially increasing budget of biological energy. To freeze trillions of synaptic connections permanently in place would require a caloric budget that would physically starve the rest of the organism to death. Perfect memory is a metabolic luxury your physical body cannot afford. So, the brain uses a ruthless data compression algorithm to save energy. It refuses to maintain permanent structures. It keeps the data plastic. It strips away the heavy, high-resolution details of the original event And when it is forced to rebuild the memory during reconsolidation, it simply pulls cheap, easily accessible data from your present environment to patch the holes. If you are angry when you recall a memory of an argument, your brain will physically weave that present anger into the newly synthesized proteins. It will alter the tone of voice you remember the other person using. It will change the words they said to justify your current emotional state. It will seal those lies into the new physical structure of the memory. The next time you access it, that forged detail will be considered an absolute historical fact. You are actively overwriting your own history to save processing power. This is not a harmless quirk of psychology. It is the systematic degradation of your identity. This thermodynamic lie is not just degrading your distant childhood memories. The corruption is happening in real time, inside the room you are sitting in, right at this exact millisecond. Pay attention to the sentence you are reading right now. To comprehend the end of this paragraph, your brain is actively holding the first few words in your short-term working memory. But because your brain cannot afford the caloric energy to keep that data pristine, it is already chemically breaking those words down and reconsolidating them. The tone of your internal voice, the ambient temperature of your room, and your current resting heart rate are actively infecting the memory of the sentence you read just 5 seconds ago. You cannot even hold a single, objective thought in your head for the duration of a single breath. Your identity is not a continuous, stable architecture. It is a hyper-fragile, low-resolution projection, constantly melting and retyping itself to adapt to the physiological stress of the present microsecond. The you that started reading this chapter is already dead, overwritten by the you finishing this sentence. Bring the claustrophobia of this reality into the current moment. You are sitting in a room, isolated from the macroscopic universe by an 80-millisecond neurological tape delay, reacting to a predictive hallucination of the present. And the only tool you have to orient yourself, your archive of the past, is a continuously mutating forgery designed to save your body caloric energy. You are trapped in a biological, solitary confinement. You have no direct access to the present, and you have no physical connection to your own past. You are a completely isolated fragment of consciousness, operating on a failing hard drive, wearing the corrupted skin of an identity that no longer exists. We have dismantled the physical universe, and we have dismantled the integrity of your memory. Your past is a biological lie. Your present is an 80-millisecond hallucination. This leaves only one frontier left to defend. But before we cross that frontier, zoom out for a second. Look at the sheer scale of the deception. The universe is deliberately compressing 3D space, heavily delaying your real-time feed, and constantly wiping your memory cache to save power. This is the exact behavior of a centralized server struggling to render a massively complex simulation. In computer science, when a system is pushed to its absolute limits, the architects have to hard-code a maximum speed limit to prevent the engine from crashing. In our universe, we call that speed limit the speed of light. It is not a mystical law of nature. It is a hardware bottleneck. And if the physical universe is operating under such extreme processing constraints, it simply cannot afford to let billions of individual biological avatars make spontaneous, unpredictable decisions in real time. It has to pre-calculate everything to keep the server stable. Which brings us to the final, most terrifying question. If your perception of reality is a forged broadcast, and your environment is just a compressed interface, what exactly is making your decisions? When you decide to stand up, or speak a word, or turn your head, who is actually giving the command? Think about the last time you made a completely arbitrary, uncoerced decision, like choosing what to eat, or picking up your phone. Do not move them yet. Just look at them. In a moment, you are going to make a completely arbitrary, uncoerced decision. You are going to choose to lift either your left index finger or your right index finger. The choice is entirely yours. You are not under duress. There is no external physical force compelling your movement. Now, make the choice. Lift one finger. When you initiated that movement, you experienced the single most foundational pillar of the human experience, the sensation of agency. You felt a sequence of events occur in a specific, linear order. First, your conscious mind deliberated. Second, your conscious mind made an executive decision. Third, your brain sent a motor command down your spine. Fourth, the finger moved. You believe that you, the conscious voice reading this sentence, are the executive commander of your biological vessel. You sit in the control room of your skull, pulling the levers of reality. That sequence of events is a neurological fraud. You are not the driver. You are a passenger holding a disconnected steering wheel. To dismantle the illusion of free will, we do not need philosophical debates about destiny. We only need an fMRI scanner and a stopwatch. In 2008, neuroscientists, led by John Dylan Haynes, at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, conducted an experiment to measure the exact biological birthplace of a decision. They placed subjects inside an advanced functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner. The subjects were given a button in each hand and told to press either the left or the right button whenever they felt the urge to do so. They were also watching a screen flashing a sequence of letters and were asked to remember exactly which letter was on the screen. The exact millisecond they consciously made the decision. The researchers were looking for the chronological order of operations. They assumed the conscious decision would happen first, followed immediately by a spike in the motor cortex to press the button. The scanners revealed a biological nightmare. The conscious decision did not happen first. By analyzing the blood flow and electrical activity in the frontopolar cortex of the brain, the supercomputers monitoring the fMRI could detect the specific pattern of the decision being made. They knew whether the subject was going to press the left button or the right button. They knew this up to 7 full seconds before the subject was consciously aware of making the choice. 7 seconds. In the realm of neurology, 7 seconds is an eternity. It is a geological era of data processing. Think about the mechanical reality of this measurement. Your subconscious brain, a dark, silent web of meat, chemical gradients, and genetic algorithms, starts crunching numbers. It analyzes your environment, your stress levels, your hormonal balance, and the random firing of background noise. It calculates a physical action. It locks in the decision to press the left button. For 7 entire seconds, the decision is already finalized in the physical architecture of your neurons. The future action is set in stone. But you, the conscious identity, know absolutely nothing about it. You are kept completely in the dark. Only at the very last millisecond, right before the motor cortex fires the signal down your arm, does the subconscious brain push a notification up to your conscious mind. And when it delivers this notification, it chemically alters the timestamp. It forces your consciousness to experience a sudden urge. It tricks you into believing that you generated the idea in that exact moment. You did not make the decision. You simply received the receipt for a transaction that your biology had already completed. But if you are not making the decisions, why does the conscious voice in your head exist at all? If the subconscious meat computer is running the entire machine, what is the thermodynamic purpose of you? To answer this, we have to look at the most brutal and revealing procedure in the history of neuroscience, the severing of the corpus callosum. Your brain is divided into 2 distinct hemispheres. They communicate with each other through a thick, dense highway of 200 million nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. In the mid-20th century, neuroscientists like Michael Gazzaniga and Roger Sperry treated patients with severe, life-threatening epilepsy by performing a radical surgery. They sliced the corpus callosum entirely in half. They severed the bridge. The left hemisphere of the brain was completely physically isolated from the right hemisphere. They could no longer share information. This surgery revealed a terrifying architectural truth about human consciousness. The two hemispheres do not do the same job. The left hemisphere contains the language centers. It is the hemisphere that speaks, reasons, and generates the internal monologue you consider to be you. The right hemisphere cannot speak, but it can read, understand basic commands, and physically control the left side of your body. Gazzaniga conducted a test on a patient with a split brain. Using a specialized screen, he flashed a written command solely into the visual field of the patient's right hemisphere. The command was simple: stand up and walk to the door. The patient's right hemisphere read the command, understood it, and sent the physical signals to the legs. The patient abruptly stood up and began walking toward the door. But remember, the bridge is cut. The left hemisphere, the talking, conscious part of the brain, did not see the command. It had absolutely no idea why the body had just stood up. To the left hemisphere, the physical body was acting entirely on its own, moving toward the door for no logical reason. Gazzaniga stopped the patient and asked him a simple question. Why did you just stand up? If the conscious mind was honest, the patient should have said, I have no idea. My legs just moved on their own. But that is not what happened. Without missing a single beat, the patient's left hemisphere answered, I wanted to go get a soda. It was a complete, fabricated lie. But the left hemisphere did not know it was lying. It genuinely believed the narrative it just invented. Gazzaniga discovered a specific neurological module located in the left hemisphere. He named it the interpreter. The sole thermodynamic function of the interpreter is to invent post-hoc rationalizations for the physical actions your body takes. It watches the autonomous, subconscious biology do whatever it wants, and then it frantically types up a fictional story to explain why the body did it. It creates a seamless narrative of intent to cover up the fact that it has no actual control over the organism. If you believe this terrifying disconnect is just a surgical anomaly, a glitch isolated to patients with severe epilepsy, you are falling into the final biological trap. The scalpel did not break the mind. The scalpel only pulled back the curtain to reveal how a healthy brain actually operates. In your fully intact, healthy brain, there is no central command center. There is no singular you. Neuroscience reveals that your brain is composed of thousands of autonomous, unconscious, highly specialized algorithms, modules competing in total darkness. One module regulates your breathing. Another calculates the geometry of the room. Another tracks the social status of your peers. They do not talk to each other. They fight. They compete for access to your motor cortex. When you chose to lift your finger, it was not an executive decision. It was simply the result of one dark, unconscious algorithm winning a thermodynamic bidding war against the others. The conscious voice in your head, the interpreter, is just a PR department that wakes up after the battle is already over. To prevent the organism from realizing it is just a swarm of blind, competing robots, the interpreter instantly spins a seamless, fictional narrative. It looks at the finger lifting and whispers, I decided to do that. Evolution uses the illusion of free will as a psychological zipper to hold the chaos of the biological swarm together. You are not the driver. You are the fictional alibi. The biological machine generates to excuse its own mechanical reflexes. We have established that the universe is a mathematical prison. We have established that your memories are degraded forgeries. We have now established that your consciousness is a powerless, fictional narrative. Every external and internal pillar of your reality has been dismantled. You are completely isolated, which means you are finally ready to confront the ultimate thermodynamic question. If the physical universe is fake, if your past is fake, and if your free will is fake. What exactly is the biological entity sitting in that chair? Let's pause and look at the wreckage we have left behind. We have dismantled the stage you walk on, proving that space and time are compressed, frozen illusions. We have dismantled the hardware you use to perceive it, exposing the 80-millisecond delay and the chemical forgery of your memories. We have even dissected the control room, revealing that your free will is nothing more than an unconscious swarm of algorithms voting in the dark. It is an overwhelming amount of data to process. Your internal PR department, the interpreter, is likely working overtime right now, frantically trying to weave this information into a narrative that doesn't trigger a total psychological collapse. For thousands of years, philosophers and theologians have built massive intellectual fortresses to protect us from this exact collapse. They invented a final, indestructible panic room. The concept of the human soul. The belief that even if the body is a machine, there is a core you, sitting inside, watching the screens, untouched by the physics of the meat. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting piece of architecture. Now, we are going to burn it to the ground. Say your own first name in your head right now. Repeat it silently, over and over, 15 times in rapid succession. Listen to the acoustic sound of the syllables echoing in your skull. Within seconds, the word will disintegrate. The linguistic structure will collapse into a meaningless sequence of animalistic grunts and clicks. The profound emotional weight you attach to that specific arrangement of vowels and consonants will vanish. The label will detach from the object. This neurological glitch is called semantic satiation. It is the exact moment your brain temporarily exhausts the chemical pathways required to sustain a meaning, leaving only the raw, physical audio feed. When the name dissolves, look at the physical body sitting in the chair. Who exactly does that name belong to? You operate under the absolute conviction that you are a singular, unified entity. You believe there is a central thinker sitting inside your skull, generating thoughts, experiencing emotions, and observing the physical room. You believe that even if we cut away your physical limbs, strip away your corrupted memories, and expose your free will as a neurological fraud, there is still a foundational, indestructible core of you left behind to witness it all. Neuroscience and evolutionary game theory categorically prove that this core does not exist. There is no thinker. There is only the thought. To dismantle the final illusion of your existence, we must return to the macroscopic thermodynamic crisis. We have established that the actual physical universe is a boiling quantum vacuum, a deeply entangled block of space-time where the concept of local distance is mathematically false. The boundary between the atoms of your skin and the atoms of the chair you are sitting on is a physical lie. At the subatomic level, your body is actively bleeding into the environment. We also established that to prevent your nervous system from being incinerated by this infinite non-local complexity, evolution built a user interface. The brain compresses the terrifying reality of the quantum block into a low-resolution, three-dimensional desktop. It renders the physical objects around you as simplified icons, so the biological machine can navigate without crashing. But an operating system requires one more vital component to function. A desktop is completely useless if there is no way to interact with it. The system needs a cursor. Yourself, the conscious ego you consider to be your soul, is not a physical entity. It is not a localized ghost haunting the machinery of your brain. It is the cursor on the biological desktop. In neurology, this cursor is generated by a specific, highly energy-intensive background process in your brain. This background rendering engine is the physical generator of your ego. When you daydream, when you worry about the future, or when you retrieve a corrupted memory from your past, it is drawing massive amounts of blood and oxygen to render the concept of I. Look at functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI scans, of patients whose background rendering engines have been temporarily shut down either through targeted magnetic stimulation, deep anesthetic intervention, or the introduction of specific neurodisruptive compounds. When this engine goes dark, the physical body does not die. The autonomic nervous system keeps breathing. The eyes keep processing light. The ears keep processing sound. But the self instantly evaporates. Patients who have this process temporarily suppressed report a terrifying, paradoxical state of being. They experience the visual data of the room, but there is no observer experiencing it. The mathematical boundary between their body and the surrounding environment collapses. They physically feel themselves dissolve into the chair, the walls, and the air. Without this rendering engine burning calories to actively draw a border, the brain defaults back to the terrifying reality of quantum entanglement. The illusion of local realism shatters. This proves a devastating biological truth. The feeling of being a separate, individual you is not a fundamental property of reality. It is a parasitic labor tool. Evolution did not create the ego to be a passive, peaceful observer. It created the cursor to be a captive receptor of suffering. A blind swarm of algorithms cannot feel terror. Meat cannot feel dread. But the organism needs terror to survive. It needs an entity to torture so the physical body will fight to secure caloric resources. The machine designed you specifically to feel the pain it cannot feel itself. You are a localized point of agony, a psychological hostage bred entirely to absorb the thermodynamic whip. Think about the silence in your head between thoughts. Sit perfectly still. Wait for a thought to appear. That silence is not peace. That silence is the biological algorithm reloading its ammunition. When the thought finally erupts out of the dark, unconscious void of the swarm, it is an absolute intrusion. You did not consciously build that thought before you thought it. It was violently injected into the physical architecture of your cortex by an algorithm you cannot control. But the moment the thought appears, your brain's rendering engine instantly attaches a psychological watermark to it. The interpreter stamps the thought with a forged label, "I thought this." It is a lie designed to make the hostage claim responsibility for the actions of the hostage taker. Your entire identity is just a continuous stream of post-hoc watermarks being rapidly printed onto autonomous biological reflexes. Bring this total erasure back into the room you are currently occupying. Look at the space between your eyes and the screen. You believe there is a subject reading these words, and an object being read, but the physics and the neurology have converged to strip that illusion away. The physical space in front of you is a zipped file, compressing the entangled, frozen block of the universe. The memories telling you who you are chemically degraded lies. The hands resting on the table are controlled by an unconscious swarm. And the voice inside your head, the internal monologue frantically trying to process this information, is just the acoustic exhaust fume of your brain's background process burning calories to keep the cursor active. There is no passenger in the vehicle. The cockpit is empty. You are a hallucination generated by a piece of meat, desperately trying to convince itself that it is not a machine. The entity you refer to as I is nothing more than a localized glitch in the thermodynamic budget of the cosmos. We have dismantled the universe. We have dismantled your biology. We have now completely erased the subject. The architecture of reality is entirely hostile, and the entity experiencing it does not even exist. If everything you are is a biological projection designed to hide the lethal source code of the universe, what happens when the hardware finally starts to fail? What happens to the phantom cursor when the screen goes black? Take a deep breath, fill your lungs completely. Now hold it. Do not let the air out. Keep your mouth closed and wait. Within seconds, a precise chemical alarm will trigger in your brainstem. It detects the rising levels of carbon dioxide in your blood. Suddenly, A wave of heat will flush through your chest. Your diaphragm will begin to spasm. A sharp, undeniable spike of pure panic will flood your conscious mind. Let the breath out. Look at what just happened. You did not consciously choose to feel that panic. You did not deliberate and decide that fear was the appropriate, logical response. The terror was injected into your conscious awareness by an autonomic algorithm overriding your control. This answers the final, most terrifying paradox of your existence. If you are just a biological illusion, a phantom cursor generated on a neurological desktop, then why do you feel pain? If there is no real pilot in the cockpit, why is the suffering so intense? Because suffering is the thermodynamic leash. Evolution did not build the illusion of the ego to be a passive observer. It built the cursor to be a captive receptor of pain. A swarm of blind, unconscious algorithms cannot navigate physical threats effectively unless there is a centralized alarm system. So, the biological machine designed you specifically to experience agony, terror, and dread. Pain is the ultimate cattle prod. The machine tortures the hallucination to force the physical body to pull its hand away from the fire or to violently gasp for air. You do not exist as an independent entity, but your capacity to suffer is an absolute mathematical requirement of the hardware. You are a hostage of the architecture, which brings us to the inevitable failure of that hardware. Place 2 fingers against the carotid artery in your neck. Feel the mechanical pulse of the blood every single time that rhythm beats. It is pumping oxygen and glucose directly into the wet meat of your brain. Inside your cells, mitochondria are violently burning that fuel to generate your biological battery power. This raw electricity is the thermodynamic currency of your existence. It is paying the astronomical biological bill to keep your 80 millisecond delay running, your corrupted memories patched, and the background rendering engine actively hallucinating your identity. What happens to the phantom cursor when the heart stops beating and the ATP budget reaches 0? Human culture has spent millennia constructing comforting mythologies about this moment. You were told that death is a peaceful transition. You are told it is a quiet fading to black, a gentle release of the soul from the physical vessel. Neurology reveals a violently different reality. Death is not a transition. It is a catastrophic, cascading system crash. When the heart stops, the brain is suddenly cut off from its oxygen supply. Without fresh oxygen, the mitochondria instantly stop producing power. Within seconds, the biological power grid of the brain begins to fail. Neurons are essentially tiny biological batteries. They maintain a precise, delicate balance of sodium and potassium ions across their membranes to hold an electrical charge. This requires constant, massive amounts of energy. When the biological battery runs out, the molecular pumps that maintain this balance seize up and stop working. The batteries rupture. In a desperate, final neurological event, the starving neurons release all of their stored energy at once. This triggers a massive, destructive wave of electrical activity tearing through your brain. In clinical neurology, they use complex terms for it, but mechanically, it is the biological equivalent of pulling the plug on an old cathode ray tube television. The vibrant, complex image on the screen rapidly shrinks down to a single, blinding point of chaotic light before vanishing completely into the cold glass. It is a literal, physical wave of short-circuiting electricity that slowly sweeps across the wrinkled surface of the brain, silencing the cortex millimeter by millimeter. It is the biological equivalent of a localized nuclear meltdown inside your skull. As this tsunami of depolarization crashes through the visual cortex and the temporal lobes, the dying brain desperately tries to process the chaotic electrical noise. This is where the final, cruelest lie of human biology occurs. Survivors of near-death experiences often report seeing a blinding white light at the end of a tunnel, or watching their life flash before their eyes. They interpret this as a spiritual gateway. It is not a gateway. It is the blue screen of death. When the optic nerve misfires due to oxygen deprivation, it floods the visual cortex with static, high-intensity noise, creating the neurological hallucination of a blinding central light. And as the cortical spreading depolarization tears through the hippocampus, the corrupted archive of your past, it violently dumps the fragmented cache of your memory directly into your conscious awareness. The life flashing before your eyes is simply the operating system frantically dumping its corrupted RAM as the motherboard melts down. It is the chaotic, meaningless exhaust of a dying machine trying to render data without enough power to stabilize the image. Bring this mechanical horror back to the room you are currently sitting in. When your pulse stops, you will not float above your body. You will be locked tightly inside the bone cockpit as the monitors shatter and the control panels catch fire. As the energy grid collapses, the biological user interface fails. The mathematical compression algorithms that kept you sane begin to dissolve. The 3D space of your room, the artificial feeling of the present moment, the boundary between your skin and the air, all of the desktop icons begin to glitch and break apart. Without biological energy to maintain the firewall, your localized consciousness is violently exposed to the raw, uncompressed physics we established at the beginning. But you do not magically merge with the boiling quantum vacuum. You do not transcend the frozen block universe, because you are just the cursor. And when the computer runs out of power, the cursor is not transferred to a new machine. The screen goes black. The graphic disappears. The data is irrecoverably deleted. The physical atoms of your body will remain permanently locked in the non-local mathematical web. The timeline of your existence will be permanently frozen as a static physical coordinate inside the four-dimensional crystal of the block universe. Do not mistake this geometric permanence for immortality. Do not find comfort in the idea that you will become a permanent, historical fixture of the cosmos. The block universe is not a museum preserving your soul. It is a thermodynamic graveyard. The coordinate of your existence is nothing more than junk data, a fossilized strand of corrupted code left behind in the mathematical architecture simply because the universe is too indifferent to empty its own trash bin. You are not living in that past coordinate. The entity that felt the pain and hallucinated the 3D desktop is entirely deleted. You are a dead file on a cold, unreadable hard drive, suspended in a block of ice that will never thaw. The universe will remain exactly as hostile, as rigid, and as dead as it always was. The only difference is that the localized, energy-intensive hallucination that was forced to suffer under your name will have finally run out of battery. We have proven that the physical environment is an unlivable, compressed lie. We have proven your memory and your free will are desperate biological forgeries. We have proven that your ego is a transparent avatar, tortured by algorithms. And we have now mapped the exact, violent, electrical storm that will permanently delete you. Every illusion has been systematically crushed. The architecture of your reality is exposed. There is nothing left to strip away. There is only the aftermath. Now that you see the prison for what it mathematically is, the final question is not how to escape. There is no escape from thermodynamics. The only question left is, how do you survive the remaining time you are forced to spend inside the machine? Recall the exact sensation of a paper cut, or the moment you accidentally touch a hot stove. The sharp, undeniable spike of pain forces you to violently pull your hand away. Analyze exactly what occurred in that microsecond. You possess the knowledge of the architecture now. You know that the physical space between your hands is a non-local, compressed thermodynamic illusion. You know that the pain did not happen in real time. It was a heavily edited, 80-millisecond delayed broadcast. You know that the conscious entity feeling the pain is nothing more than a phantom cursor generated by your brain's background process to keep your biological swarm alive. You know, mathematically and neurologically, that the pain is a biological forgery, and yet, you still pulled your thumb away. Knowing the truth did not override the hardware. Knowing the physics did not disable the biological alarm. You are entirely aware that you are trapped inside a hallucination, but the rules of the hallucination still violently dictate your physical behavior. Popular culture, science fiction, and spiritual mythologies have sold you a comforting lie about the nature of truth. They promise you that awakening brings liberation. They tell you that if you can see through the illusion of reality, if you can look past the 3D space, the linear time, and the false ego, you will transcend the system. You will become a master of your own destiny, free from the constraints of the physical world. Thermodynamics does not care about your spiritual enlightenment. Awakening is not liberation. Awakening is solitary confinement with the lights turned on. To understand why you cannot escape the interface, we must return to the evolutionary game theory of Donald Hoffman. Evolution designed the 3D desktop of your reality, specifically to hide the lethal, infinitely dense source code of the quantum vacuum. But evolution also hard-coded a failsafe into the operating system. It made the interface mandatory. When you look at your computer desktop, you know that a blue folder icon is not a real, physical folder. It is just a cluster of pixels representing a string of binary code on a hard drive. But if you drag that blue folder into the trash bin, the underlying file is permanently deleted. The icon is an illusion, but the consequences of interacting with the icon are absolute. The macroscopic world operates on the exact same ruthless logic. Look at the solid wall of your room. You know that at the quantum level, the wall is composed of 99% empty space, vibrating with the chaotic decay of virtual particles. It is a simplified biological icon, but stand up and try to walk through it. You cannot. The electromagnetic repulsion between the electrons in your body and the electrons in the wall will violently halt your momentum. The operating system will physically enforce the boundary of the icon, regardless of what your conscious mind believes. If you step in front of a moving train, the train is just a low-resolution rendering of quantum data. The speed of the train is just an illusion of the block universe. The fear you feel is just a chemical injection. But if you do not move your biological cursor out of the way, the operating system will violently delete your file. The system's final fail-safe will trigger. The biological power grid will collapse, and the blue screen of death will activate. You will be permanently erased from the desktop. You cannot hack the system from the inside, because your conscious mind is not the programmer. Your conscious mind is the software being run. This creates a state of permanent, inescapable cognitive dissonance. In psychiatry, this is the definition of a lucid nightmare. You are awake inside a dream, but you have absolutely no control over the narrative. You do not need to look to the abstract anxiety of tomorrow to feel this imprisonment. You do not need to think about your career or human social rituals. The absolute tyranny of the machine is happening to you in this exact microsecond, right where you are sitting. Pay attention to your own eyes. Try to stop blinking. Command your eyelids to remain open indefinitely. Within seconds, the autonomic nervous system will detect the microscopic evaporation of moisture on your corneas. It will calculate the thermodynamic risk of tissue damage. The unconscious module will completely override your conscious command, violently firing the orbicularis oculi muscles to force a blink. Try to stop breathing. Try to stop your salivary glands from producing moisture. Try to stop the peristaltic contractions in your gut. You cannot. You are a prisoner of your own autonomic reflexes. The machine is actively treating your conscious intent as irrelevant noise. It is forcing you to perform mechanical maintenance on the meat vessel, second by second, breath by breath. And while you are being violently jerked around by these biological strings, the interpreter in your left hemisphere is constantly running, generating a seamless internal monologue of lies, telling you that you are the one in charge. But now, the curtain has been pulled back. You will be sitting in the dark bone cockpit, watching your hands move, listening to your mouth speak words that were pre-calculated 7 seconds ago by a blind biological swarm. You will feel the 80-millisecond delay. You will recognize that your interactions are just two isolated, hallucinating meat computers, exchanging acoustic exhaust fumes to secure caloric resources. You will know that the future you are anxiously working toward is already permanently frozen in the four-dimensional crystal of the block universe. Your destiny is a fossil. The panic you feel about tomorrow is a thermodynamic waste of energy. You are a lucid hostage. You are forced to play a game where the rules are rigged, the board is an illusion, and the player does not even exist. Bring the absolute, suffocating isolation of this reality back to the space you are in right now. You have been stripped of the universe, you have been stripped of your body, you have been stripped of your identity. You are a phantom cursor, strapped to an autonomous machine, forced to act out a script that was finalized billions of years ago, using a brain that lies to you to save battery power. You are entirely alone inside this simulation. But if you are just a fractured, unconscious swarm generating the illusion of a centralized I, then what exactly are you looking at when you leave this room and look into the eyes of another human being? If your cockpit is empty, who is flying their machine? We have reached a dangerous level of isolation. If you have followed the math and the neurology this far, you are likely feeling a profound, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. The walls of your reality have shrunk down to the inner surface of your own skull. You are a phantom cursor trapped in a bone cockpit, realizing for the first time that you are completely alone in the dark. It is a cold, unlivable state of mind, but human beings are incredibly resilient. When faced with absolute existential dread, your biology will instinctively reach for its strongest, most heavily fortified defense mechanism. It will reach for connection. You will look at the people around you, your family, your friends, your partner, and you will tell yourself, even if the universe is a dead machine, and even if my own ego is an illusion, the love I feel for them is real. Our connection transcends this cold physics. It is the most noble, romantic instinct our species possesses. But it is also the final illusion, standing between you and the absolute bedrock of reality. Bring to mind the face of someone you deeply care about, a partner, a family member, a close friend. Imagine looking directly into their eyes. When you hold that image, your biological machine runs a highly specific background script, firing a pre-programmed sequence of neuroelectrical signals to simulate the physical sensation of warmth. You operate under the absolute conviction that a bridge exists between your mind and theirs. You believe that when you are sitting in a room with this person, looking into their eyes, you are connecting with a conscious, independent soul. You believe that empathy, love, and understanding can temporarily transcend the boundaries of your physical body. You are hallucinating a bridge over a chasm that cannot be crossed. To destroy the final, most desperately guarded comfort of your existence, we must apply the exact same thermodynamic and physical laws we use to dismantle your own identity and project them onto the entities around you. Recall the macroscopic physics of the 80-millisecond neurological delay. Light takes time to cross the physical space between two objects. Sound waves take time to compress the air molecules. The electrical signals crawling up your optic nerve and auditory pathways are brutally slow. This means that even in the most intimate moments of your life, you have never interacted with another human being in the present tense. When you sit across a table from someone you love, you are not seeing them as they are. You are receiving a delayed, heavily edited, historical broadcast of a physical event that has already expired. You are reacting to a ghost. By the time your brain stitches together the visual image of their smile, the physical muscles in their face have already begun to move into a new configuration. The person you think you are talking to is always separated from you by a cold, impenetrable wall of thermodynamic latency. But the isolation is far more severe than a simple delay in the broadcast. Recall Donald Hoffman's evolutionary game theory. Evolution built your visual cortex as a user interface to hide the lethal, infinitely dense reality of the quantum vacuum. The entity sitting across from you is not a solid object. At the base layer of reality, they are a deeply entangled, boiling cloud of subatomic particles, bleeding seamlessly into the oxygen of the room and the fabric of the chair. If you saw their true physical state, your biological battery would instantly drain and your nervous system would crash. So, your brain actively renders them as a localized, low-resolution icon. The face you love, the sound of their voice, the warmth of their skin, none of these properties belong to the actual entity. They are data formats generated entirely inside the pitch-black bone cockpit of your own skull. You have never actually seen the person you love. You have only ever looked at a 3D avatar rendered on your own biological desktop. You have never touched them. You have only ever felt the electrical signals generated inside your own somatosensory cortex when your physical atoms violently repelled their physical atoms. You are entirely alone in the dark, interacting with the graphical user interface of your own operating system. But what about the emotional connection? What about the profound sensation of empathy when you see them cry, or the shared joy when they laugh? In the late 20th century, neurophysiologists discovered a specific class of cells in the premotor cortex known as mirror neurons. When you watch another biological machine perform an action or display an expression of pain, these mirror neurons automatically fire in your own brain, artificially simulating the exact same neurological state. You literally feel a muted version of their pain or joy. Humanity has romanticized this neurological reflex as empathy and compassion. We call it the foundation of the human soul. Evolutionary biology defines it as a predictive threat assessment algorithm, a blind swarm of algorithms competing for survival in a hostile environment needs to secure caloric resources and avoid physical danger. To do this effectively, the swarm must calculate the future trajectory of the other biological machines moving around it. Mirror neurons do not exist to foster spiritual connection. They exist to run a real-time simulation of the other entity's physical state, so your brain can predict what they are going to do next. If the other machine is experiencing fear, your mirror neurons simulate that fear so your organism can instantly prepare to run from the unseen predator. If the other machine is displaying affection, your mirror neurons simulate the bond to ensure access to shared resources and genetic reproduction. Empathy is not love. It is a highly optimized caloric calculation designed to manipulate the behavior of the surrounding meat to ensure your own survival. Now, apply the final, most devastating layer of the architecture. In the previous chapters, we proved that you are not the driver of your vehicle. You are the phantom cursor. You are a localized point of agony, a psychological hostage bred entirely to absorb the thermodynamic whip of the machine. The conscious voice in your head, the interpreter, is just a PR department generating post-hoc lies to justify the autonomous reflexes of the blind swarm. If this is mathematically and neurologically true for you, it is absolutely true for them. The person you love is not driving their vehicle either. The cockpit inside their skull is just as empty as yours. When they look at you and speak words of affection, there is no centralized, executive soul generating that love. Their autonomic nervous system calculated a physiological requirement. Their unconscious modules fought a thermodynamic bidding war in the dark. The winning algorithm violently fired a motor command down their throat, forcing their vocal cords to vibrate and their mouth to move. And only after the physical words were already spoken did their interpreter module wake up, stamp a forged psychological watermark onto the event, and whisper to them, "I chose to say that." But the isolation is far more absolute than two machines shouting across a void. You are not even exchanging exhaust fumes with another machine. You are trapped entirely inside your own. In cognitive science, this is known as the theory of mind. When you look into the eyes of someone you love and listen to them speak, your brain does not directly connect with their consciousness. Instead, your biological hardware uses its own mirror neurons and predictive algorithms to render a completely fictional, simulated copy of their mind inside your own skull. The person you are arguing with, the person you are comforting, the person you are making love to, they do not exist in the space you are interacting with. You are running a subroutine. You are experiencing an entirely isolated, closed-loop monologue with a 3D avatar generated by your own visual cortex, using a simulated personality generated by your own frontal lobe. You have never met another human being. You have spent your entire life completely alone inside a dark bone cockpit, talking to your own software. And remember the inescapable geometry of the frozen block. None of these interactions are dynamic. None of them are freely chosen. Every argument you will ever have, every moment of intimacy, every word spoken between you and the people you love is permanently fossilized as a static physical coordinate inside the four-dimensional crystal of the block universe. The script was written and the ink was dry billions of years before the solar system formed. You are meat puppets, suspended on physical strings, acting out a pre-recorded VHS tape, using a brain that chemically forces you to feel the pain of the performance. Bring the claustrophobia of this absolute interpersonal collapse back to your immediate environment. Look around the room you are in. Even if it is crowded with people, it is mathematically and neurologically empty. You are cut off from the physical universe. You are cut off from your own past. You are a hostage to your autonomic reflexes. And the other entities in the room are just delayed, low-resolution icons rendered by your visual cortex, piloted by blind algorithms that do not even know they exist. There is no society. There is no connection. There is only a collection of isolated, suffering cursors trapped on their own separate desktops, waiting for the cortical spreading depolarization to finally delete their files. You have reached the absolute bedrock of reality. Every comfort, every illusion, every macro and micro layer of your existence has been meticulously dissected, audited, and destroyed by the laws of thermodynamics. There is only one final step remaining. Now that the autopsy of your reality is complete, what do you do with the corpse? Press your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Feel the wet, biological texture of your own tissue. Swallow the saliva pooling in your throat. Pay attention to that mechanical, involuntary reflex. You are trapped inside a porous, fragile bag of water, calcium, and carbon. You are physically tethered to a biological pump in your chest that must violently contract 100,000 times a day just to keep the lights on. If that pump stops for even a few minutes, the mathematical architecture of your consciousness is permanently deleted. We have reached the end of the autopsy. The corpse of your reality is lying open on the table, meticulously dissected down to its thermodynamic bones. Look at what remains. The physical space around you is a compressed, low-resolution biological desktop generated by your visual cortex to hide the lethal, infinitely dense chaos of the quantum vacuum. The flowing river of time is a neurological hallucination, masking the fact that your entire existence from your birth to your death is already permanently fossilized as a static string of junk data inside the four-dimensional crystal of the block universe. The past you use to define your identity is a continuously degraded forgery, chemically burned to ash and retyped by your memory to fit the physiological stress of the present microsecond. The free will you believe you possess is a post-hoc lie, stitched together by the interpreter in your left hemisphere to cover up the fact that you are controlled by a dark, blind swarm of competing biological algorithms. The people you love are delayed, pre-rendered icons, piloted by their own unconscious swarms, using mirror neurons to mathematically calculate how to extract caloric resources from your physical vessel. And you, the entity reading these words, the voice inside the skull, are not a pilot. You are the phantom cursor. You are a localized point of agony, a psychological hostage engineered by the machine specifically to feel terror and pain, forcing the physical body to avoid the thermodynamic deletion of death. Every pillar has been crushed. There is no soul to transcend the physical realm. There is no spiritual unity to be found in the cosmos. There is only meat, electricity, and the cold, indifferent math of the void. You might assume that possessing this knowledge gives you an advantage. You might believe that seeing the architecture of the prison somehow elevates you above the other blind meat computers sleepwalking through the simulation. That is the final, most pathetic illusion of the human ego. Knowledge does not rewrite the source code. Knowing that the wall is a quantum illusion will not allow you to walk through it. Knowing that your anxiety is just a chemical injection of cortisol will not stop your heart from racing. You are fully lucid, perfectly aware of the strings attached to your limbs, but the operating system still violently forces you to dance. But the true horror of your biological confinement is much worse than simply being a lucid hostage. Right now, as you process the terrifying weight of this reality, your biological machine is calculating the thermodynamic cost of your dread. The cognitive dissonance of realizing you do not exist requires massive amounts of electrical energy to sustain. Maintaining this level of existential horror is biologically inefficient. It drains the battery. It threatens the operational stability of the swarm. Do not mistake this return to ignorance as a biological struggle. Your brain is not actively fighting to suppress this truth to save energy. Remember the inescapable geometry of the block universe. Everything is already frozen. The feeling of awakening you possess right now is simply a temporary, pre-calculated glitch on the static VHS tape of your existence. And the exact coordinate where you forget this truth has already been permanently embedded in the four-dimensional crystal for 14 billion years. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and seamlessly re-engage with the illusion of the self, you are not losing a battle against your biology. You are simply passing through a pre-rendered coordinate where the data of this realization degrades. The ignorance is scheduled. The universe is not trying to drag you back to the hallucination. The hallucination is just the next frozen frame of the film. You are a mechanical fossil experiencing the illusion of forgetting. So, do not look for a profound takeaway. Do not look for a silver lining or a method of escape. There is no escape from thermodynamics. You are an anomaly of compressed data, a thermodynamic glitch temporarily rendering a user interface in the dark. Sit in the silence of your room. Listen to the mechanical rhythm of your breathing. Feel the 80 millisecond delay of the physical world pressing against your skin. You are completely alone inside the bone cockpit. Wait for the autonomic reflexes to pull your strings. Wait for the interpreter to spin its next lie. And wait for that final electrical wave to pull the plug, permanently shutting off the screen, leaving nothing behind but an unreadable fossil in the dead ice of space-time. The broadcast is over. You can return to the hallucination now. Do not move. Stay exactly where you are. Breathe in. Feel the mechanical expansion of your lungs. Breathe out. Feel the expulsion of carbon dioxide. You are still here. The autopsy of your reality is complete. The universe has been dismantled into a frozen, dead block of quantum data. Your identity has been reduced to a phantom cursor, a thermodynamic hallucination desperately burning biological battery power to maintain the illusion of a self. Every pillar of meaning, purpose, and spiritual comfort has been mathematically pulverized. You are standing in the absolute center of the void. The architecture of the prison is fully illuminated. There are no doors. There is no escape from the laws of thermodynamics. But pay very close attention to the sensation currently occupying your mind. If you truly understand the physics we have just explored, the crushing dread you felt in the previous chapters should be fundamentally mutating. The panic should be dissolving. The claustrophobia should be collapsing into something entirely different. It should be collapsing into absolute, terrifying invulnerability. To understand this final, paradoxical pivot of human existence, we have to look at the mechanical source of your suffering. For your entire life, the biological machine has held you hostage by weaponizing the concept of meaning. The background rendering engine, the PR department in your skull, convinced you that you were the central protagonist in a linear narrative. It told you that your choices mattered. It told you that your failures were permanent scars on your soul. It told you that you had a cosmic responsibility to succeed, to find purpose, to be remembered. That narrative was the heaviest thermodynamic burden you ever carried. It was the leash the operating system used to drag you through the simulation. But the math has cut the leash. If the universe is a frozen, four-dimensional block universe, then there is no future for you to ruin. Your destiny is not a fragile thing you can break through incompetence. It is a static, geological fossil that was set in stone billions of years before your birth. You cannot make a wrong decision, because the concept of a decision is a neurological forgery generated 7 seconds after the fact by a blind swarm of algorithms. If you are not the driver, you cannot be blamed for the car crash. Look at the abstract anxieties that have tortured you for years. Think about your social status. Think about the embarrassing mistakes you made a decade ago. Think about your fears of financial ruin, of rejection, of not living up to your potential. Those fears only have power if you believe the 3D desktop is real. They only hurt if you believe the other icons on the screen are independent judges evaluating your worth. But you know the architecture now. The people judging you are not even there. They are delayed, low-resolution avatars, piloted by unconscious modules running predictive threat assessment algorithms to extract calories. They do not possess a central soul to judge you with. When someone insults you or rejects you, it is simply a localized meat computer discharging acoustic exhaust fumes because its cortisol levels spiked. Why would you allow your phantom cursor to feel agony over the automated acoustic exhaust of a blind machine? The concept of social humiliation is a mathematical absurdity in a quantum vacuum. The universe does not record your embarrassments. The cosmos does not keep a ledger of your awkward interactions. The infinite, boiling sea of virtual particles does not care about your credit score, your career trajectory, or your legacy. When you die, the biological power grid will collapse, the battery will run out, and the blue screen of death will permanently delete your file. You will not face a cosmic tribunal. You will not have to answer for your sins. The universe will simply overwrite your corrupted data and continue its silent expansion. This is not a tragedy. This is the ultimate scientific absolution. Nihilism is often misunderstood as a philosophy of despair. People assume that if nothing matters, then existence is a tragedy. But that is a symptom of a lingering ego. That is the phantom cursor crying, because it realizes it isn't the administrator of the system. Optimistic nihilism is the recognition that because nothing matters, you are entirely free from the burden of the cosmos. If the universe has no purpose for you, then you are unassigned. you are off the clock. You are a temporary, meaningless glitch in the thermodynamic budget of the cosmos. And that glitch is the most liberating phenomenon in the physical world. Bring this mechanical liberation into the immediate present. Think about tomorrow morning. The autonomic nervous system will force you to wake up. You will still have to go to work. You will still have to participate in the arbitrary social rituals of the human species. You will still have to operate within the 3D desktop to secure the caloric resources your physical body demands. The hardware still requires maintenance, but your relationship to the simulation will be fundamentally severed. When you walk into a room, you will not carry the crushing weight of existential purpose. You will walk in as a lucid dreamer. You will watch the blind algorithms in your left hemisphere spin their lies, and you will simply observe them. You will feel the 80 millisecond neurological tape delay, and you will recognize it not as a prison, but as a buffer, a shield, protecting you from the lethal source code of reality. If the game is completely rigged, and the points do not matter, and the board is going to be thrown into the incinerator anyway, then the only logical response is to simply play the game for the sensory input of the current microsecond. Drink a cup of coffee. The warmth of the ceramic against your skin is a biological forgery. It is an electrical signal processed by your somatosensory cortex, delayed by a fraction of a second, generated by the electromagnetic repulsion of subatomic atoms. It is entirely fake, but it feels warm. The warmth is the only thing that belongs to you. The simulation is a lie, but the sensory experience of the simulation is the only art you have access to. If the universe spent 14 billion years cooling down, entangling its particles, and compressing its physics just so a temporary bag of water and carbon could hallucinate the taste of roasted beans for 3 minutes, why not drink the coffee? But here is the ultimate paradox of the trap we have just built. If the universe is a frozen block of data, if your free will is a biological illusion, and if nothing you do will physically matter when the stars finally burn out, does that make you feel heavy? Or does it make you feel light? Think about the crushing pressure you carry every single day. You worry about failing, you worry about your social status, you worry about what the universe wants from you. But the physics we discussed tonight tells us that the universe wants absolutely nothing. It is deaf, blind, and indifferent. It doesn't care if you become a billionaire or a beggar. It doesn't care if you write a masterpiece or stare at a blank wall. This means you are officially off the hook. If the script is a chaotic accident and the universe is drifting toward heat death without a plan, then you are completely free. You are not a slave to a cosmic destiny. The lack of objective meaning is not a tragedy. It is a blank canvas. Think about the band on the Titanic. The ship hit the iceberg. The water was rising. The musicians knew with mathematical certainty that the ship was going down and they were going to die in the freezing Atlantic. So, what did they do? Did they scream? Did they give up? No. They grabbed their violins and they played. It served no practical purpose. It didn't patch the hole. It didn't save a single life. But that act of playing in the face of certain death was an act of ultimate defiance. It was a way of saying to the universe, you can crush my body, you can freeze the stars, but in this moment, right now, I am creating beauty where there was none. We are all on the Titanic. Entropy guarantees the ship is going down, but every time you laugh, every time you create art, every time you love someone knowing you will eventually lose them, you are playing the violin. You are actively rebelling against the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy wants you to be cold, disorganized, and dead. By being warm, organized, and alive, you are spitting in the face of the universe. We tend to feel small when we look at the cosmos. We think, I am nothing compared to a galaxy. But a galaxy cannot love. A galaxy cannot write a song. A galaxy doesn't even know it exists. One single human thought is more complex and more precious than a billion burning stars. You are the universe's way of crying, laughing, and screaming into the void. You are the glitch that refuses to be fixed. So go out there, look up at the night sky, feel the 80 millisecond delay, and smile. Because you are the statistical miracle that made it to the party against impossible odds. The trap of time is real, but you get to decorate the walls of your cell, play the music, enjoy the broadcast, and whatever you do, don't blink, because you don't want to miss the show.